cool was that introduction? That took me ages to make an iMovie. So if you haven't guessed already, I'm going to be doing a series of videos focusing on the legendary indie jangle post-punk label out of New Zealand called Flying Nun. I'll be doing a series of videos showcasing the label. This one, being the first one, is more of an introduction to the label. I'll do a bit of an overview talking about sort of the key bands, the influences, the sounds, things like that, to give you a general idea of what I'm talking about. And then later on I may do a few videos that focus on certain albums or certain artists or something like that. So yeah, this is the first part, so I may not mention every artist immediately, but we'll get to that. So yeah, this is the intro. I guess let's get started. Okay, so the Flying Nun Label, founded in 1981 in Christchurch, New Zealand. It was originally sort of founded to capture the music coming out of the local music coming out of Christchurch, but ended up more focusing on the city of Dunedin. So that's where you may have heard the term the Dunedin sound, which sort of refers to the jangly, sort of indie jangly pop sounds coming out of the early bands coming out from that label. So it's quite hard to, if you can imagine what a rough, windy town in the South Island of New Zealand was like in 1981. Very isolated. These bands sort of, when they heard about music, they generally heard about it almost a year and a half later. So I think punk didn't come to New Zealand for a while. You had a bit of a punk scene before the Flying Nun label, with bands like Toy Love and Chris Knox and The Enemy were pushing that sort of stuff. And I guess these bunch of artists on the Nun label were influenced by punk to the point that the label was founded on the principles of doing it yourself. And these guys, it's amazing to think that this music, they operated in their own bubble. They didn't really have many outside influences, and I guess that sort of explains why a lot of the bands had a similar sound or used similar instruments. It's just amazing, really. But it's very hard to get across without hearing the music, you know, how amazing that this stuff came out, and just great artists, great music, which you'll see later on in the series. But yeah, I guess the label had a very do-it-yourself. The bands were allowed to do whatever they wanted to. The artists and the artwork was all very handwritten, very rough. It definitely took a punk ethic through with it. Sort of a combination of your jangle psych stuff with the punk attitude. I suppose that's probably a way to get it across. So that sort of explains a bit more, I guess, the ethics of the label and where it came from. But yeah, it's just crazy to think that they almost were in this little bubble in 1981 in a city in New Zealand doing the stuff that it got a bit of recognition later on, but initially, you know, I think John Peel picked it up on it, you know, 4 or 5 or maybe 3 or 4 years after the initial foundation of the label. But it was, yeah, relatively unknown to the rest of the wider world for a while. So the label was founded by a guy called Roger Shepherd, who was in Christchurch. I think he was a local record store owner at the time. And the first release the label put out was actually not that representative of the label as a whole. It was sort of more, it was a band called the Pin Group, who released a 7-inch called Ambivalence, and it was a very sort of post-punk, very dark Joy Division record. The singer Roy Montgomery sort of got a bit of stick for sounding very similar to Ian Curtis, and that 7-inch now is really expensive to find, being the first Flying Nun release. You know, it's like a $500 7-inch, which is crazy money, you know. I mean, the only way to ever get that is if I found it in a charity shop or something like that. And then the second release was by The Clean. The single was called Tally Ho, which you can hear in the background at the moment. If you can hear it, you can sort of hear that sort of this perfect jangle psych pop track. And this single really helped launch the label and get a bit of traction in the community, and help propel the label forward into the future. So yeah, that's sort of an intro to the label, I suppose. I think next we'll talk about some of the key bands and the key figures on the label. So digging into the Flying Nun label, when you sort of scratch beneath the surface a bit, you see it's not just that jangly indie sound behind it. There's so many shoot-offs within that. I suppose your top 4 bands that people sort of talk about that represent the label more on the jangly vein. I suppose you would have the Clean, the Bats, the Chills, and the Verlaines, I guess, and they sort of represented the early jangly sound. But then when you look a bit further, you get bands like the Gordons, who were another early release, but they focus a lot more on noise and texture and harsher sounds, with a bit of a post-punk edge. And then you get people like Chris Knox with his band the Tall Dwarfs, and they sort of focus on a lot of lo-fi recording and experimental sort of weird stuff like that. Chris Knox is an absolute driving force for New Zealand music. He's the one that sort of shook people up and really made this Flying Nun label the reality. I'm going to do a whole separate video on Chris Knox, because it's just so hard to put his contribution into a few sentences, you know. Amazing guy, an amazing contribution to New Zealand music. So it's so hard to pigeonhole this label, because, and a lot of people do with the Dunedin sound. But I find I'm finding a lot more artists that sound different to that, or offshoots of that, and I think that's really fascinating as well. So yeah, obviously you've got the Bats, who are one of my favourite Flying Nun bands, led by Robert Scott. Just off the bat, if you want to check out their album Daddy's Highway, please do. It's an absolutely amazing album. It's very textured, jangly. All the songs sort of blend or bleed into one, and just sort of like wintry. If you listen to it, you know exactly what I mean. Just a beautiful band, really. And then you've got the classic album there, Hallelujah All the Way Home by the Verlaines. Sort of has a more of a poetic side to it, I suppose, or it's a little bit more arty. Sort of almost. The lyrics don't sit back as much, but they're a bit more, I guess, I want to say dramatic, or in your face, or tell more of a story. And then you get the Clean, obviously, with if you check out the Boodle EP, to me that's one of the most perfect EPs you can get. Obviously focusing more on abrasive guitars, which sort of lead you more into a Sonic Youth domain, but even then they're still very jangly. And almost touch on bits of surf rock elements. Amazing band, and then the Chills, you know, absolutely amazing. Martin Phillips is an amazing songwriter and can craft some really great pop songs. You know, Rolling Moon is one of my favorites. For me, that track just really captures the openness of New Zealand, and to me it sounds like New Zealand. I don't really know how to describe it, but when I put it on, it just sounds like moving through the green hills, and I just get this feeling that I don't get. It's hard to get that feeling, you know. Obviously, you know, Kaleidoscope World, Pink Frost being one of the more famous songs by the Chills and the label altogether. So obviously that's just a handful that I'm talking about. I'll go through a lot more in detail when I start showing some records, which I will be doing soon. I know I've been doing a lot of talking, but that's sort of an idea of some of the bands that you may have heard of already. So I just wanted to talk about some of the influences that the bands on the Flying Nun label have had on music around the world, and what that has meant for modern music, I suppose. I guess bands like Sonic Youth have openly said that they're huge admirers of the label. As you know, Flying Nun was formed in '81, and I think Sonic Youth formed in '81 too, and after a couple of years of making music, they obviously were really influenced by the sound coming out of the Flying Nun label. So that's really cool that the label can you know someone like Sonic Youth, who, as we know, are such innovators and such a huge part of alternative music, can say that they really were influenced by Flying Nun Label. Pavement, again, same thing, highly influenced by the Bats and the Chills. I think I went to go see Pavement, I think it would have been about, I think it was in 2006, and it was their first world, they did a reunion tour, and this was the first show was in New Zealand at the time, and they had the Bats opening for them, which was sort of a bit of a homage to their influences. So they wanted to pay tribute, I suppose, by getting the Bats to open for them. So that was one of those really special shows for me, you know, once in a lifetime experience. Admittedly, at the time, I didn't maybe realise how important that was, but yeah. So Pavement, I've said they're huge fans. If you guys know the Mountain Goats, John Daniel, the lead singer, has said that his whole style of lo-fi, bare acoustic stuff came out of his admiration for Chris Knox, who was in firstly the punk band The Enemy and Toy Live, and then went on to do Tall Dwarfs and some solo stuff. So you can definitely hear the influence here. I didn't know the Mountain Goats before I knew Chris Knox's music, so when I discovered that link, I was blown away and almost proud in a way that this label can do that to modern music, you know. Even bands like Yo La Tengo have said that they've been influenced by the Django guitar style, you know. So, and then even the newspaper The Guardian have sort of mentioned that they have a feeling that maybe the Flying Nun label has covertly influenced grunge music in the USA as well. So it's an amazing thing that you can have, you know, these bands that are doing this music so far at the other end of the world in their own bubble, not really knowing what was going on in the rest of the world at the time, you know. It's amazing. So that's a few of the influences. I'm sure that, you know, there's many more bands that really look up to the Flying Nun label and stuff like that. So yeah, there you go. That's sort of the influences.
Spick and span. Spick and span. Spick, span.
So in terms of the more recent history of the label, I guess some of you guys in the US would have seen that, as I mentioned earlier, the label Capture Tracks has reissued a lot of the harder to find stuff, and it is getting very hard to find some of that, especially the original Flying Nun stuff. Even in Australia and New Zealand, if you find it in the wild, you know, it's quite a big deal. It's very lucky to find it. So yeah, amazingly, Flying Nun have teamed up with Capture Tracks, and they've started to reissue quite a lot of stuff, especially the past. I think they've been doing it for about 4 years now, and especially in the last year, they've put out a lot of really great stuff. All the Bat stuff, the Verlaines. There's a couple more coming out later this year. Look Blue, Go Purple compilation. JPS Experience is coming out. Skeptics. You know, there's a lot of really great stuff. I mean, if you basically want to get those reissues, they're all really high quality and they really capture the label. So yeah, it's just really cool that the stuff's coming to light and getting distributed across the US and the world, really, which is really great. So I guess in terms of the label recent releases, it's sort of working backwards. I know Neil Finn and his wife in sort of a consortium ended up buying back the label. So prior to that, Warner Music had it. I think they bought it in 2006. And from 2006 to that, you know, in between those years, nothing really happened with the label. There was no promotion, wasn't really doing much. And then before that, Mushroom Records, Festival Records, Mushroom Records had it. I think they bought it in 1990, and then prior to that, it was Flying Nun, as we know. So ever since Neil Finn and his wife, or the consortium, including those two, bought it back. Roger Shepherd, who I think when he left the label, he went to the UK and did some winemaking stuff, and he's came back and he's back on board with the label, and they've revived the logo and the feel, and they're putting out new releases from local bands, bands like Surf City, who I highly rate. If you check out their album called Kudos, I think it is an amazing record. It's like the Flying Nun jangly sound, but it has bits of krautrock elements in it. Really cool. So yeah, a lot of Robert Scott from the Bats' solo albums, on the Flying Nun label. So it really feels like they're back in business and back at doing what they're good at, which is really cool. I even went and visited the Flying Nun store, which has just opened up in Auckland, New Zealand, and that was an amazing experience. I got a little photo of me standing outside smiling, which I'll put up now. So it's a good time for the label, I suppose. They're really going through a really amazing growth, and they're putting on a festival later this year called The Other's Way, with a lot of Flying Nun Label bands on it, which I may or would very much like to go to. So that's in November. So yeah, overall it's a really positive time for the label, I suppose. So I'm just going to show you a couple of different labels in relation to what I was talking about before, about the different phases with festival records and the early original labels and stuff like that. So which sort of might help explain what I was talking about. So this is the 12-inch single of "I Love My Leather Jacket" by the Chills, which is a favourite track of mine. And I do love my leather jacket, which I often wear on weekends. So as you can see, it's very sort of handmade, really cool style. I think this one might showcase it a bit more. This is from the Need and Double record. This is an original pressing too. You sort of see it's all very hand drawn, almost very monochromatic. Has that early punk thing I was talking about, stylistically speaking. So those two are sort of like more of the early, almost hand-drawn bits. I guess moving into the later stuff. This is Daddy's Highway by the Bats. This is sort of a label that people recognise, or you see these ones are sort of a bit more common. It's the Festival Records Flying Nun label. See a bit there. So they were sort of uniform a bit later on. You get a lot of their albums that came out with that red and yellow. I suppose it's like a pink and yellow design on it. And that's probably one you'll see a lot more of in record stores. And then moving on, this is the Surf City album I was just talking about before, called Kudos. The interesting thing about this label is it sort of has a bit of the same feel as this. They've sort of gone for a bit of a comparison. But the labels more these days aren't as custom or aren't as uniform, but they still sort of have little hints that relate to previous sort of styles or designs of the labels, which is kind of a nice little thing they have. So that gives you an idea of some of them. Hopefully in the next video, well, definitely in the next video, I'll be showing a lot more vinyl, because I feel like I've done a lot of talking, not a lot of showing. So if you've stuck with me so far, thank you very much, and I hope I've taught you something. I just want to quickly show a little compilation if you are looking at digging into the label a bit more. There's definitely a handful of really good comps that came out. I don't have a copy, but In Love With These Times is a really great one. For the 21st anniversary of the label, they released one called Under the Influence, which goes a long way in referencing the whole idea of how the label has influenced a lot of popular musicians or popular alternative indie musicians. And this one, which is one of my favourites, this is an early compilation on the Flying Nun label, Tuatara, which I think it just captures some of the bands that the classic bands, I would say. So this is a gatefold here. Again, there's a really cool little drawing here. You can see that. So yeah, again on here we've got the Clean, the Gordons, the Verlaines, Children's Hour, the Chills, Sneaky Feelings, the Bats are on here, Tall Dwarfs. So this is really a real classic compilation. It's on sort of the green Flying Nun label, so that was a little bit later. If you're looking for a place to start, I'd recommend this one. The other compilation is Time to Go, which I think came out a couple of years ago. It's called the Southern Psychedelic Movement. So there you go. That's highly recommended, I suppose, as is most of the stuff on the label. Just avoid a band called the Netherworld Dancing Toys. If you Google them, you know exactly why I say that. Some people may like them. They're a bit of an anomaly on the label. So yeah, I really hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you've got something out of it. Again, it's a subject that's really dear to my heart, so I really want to try and explain the label or get across as much as I can to you guys. And again, this is just part one of a series that may go on for a long time, or hopefully goes on for a long time. I'm looking forward to definitely focusing on really classic albums. The next video will be a feature on this iconic album. I've talked about it. If you do watch my videos, you will have seen I've talked about this on a handful of times. I would really like to do a video that sort of does the album justice, because I feel like I've only talked about it in passing. And I'm going to delve into that and talk about the artists and the songs and how important that record there was for the label itself. So yeah, if you just stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching, and if you like it, please subscribe. Hopefully this video comes out really well, and hopefully I'll see you all very, very soon. Thank you.